let's test you on policy a little bit.
We'll see how little I know about policy.
Do you think that if a video has somebody using a slur against a protected group of people, marginalized group, that we should take the video down?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, what if the slur is being used as part of a comedy routine?
I guess I would have to see if it was mean-spirited or if it was more humor-based.
What if the slur is being used by somebody who's actually a member of the group that the slur is about?
Yeah,
That'd be okay?
yeah, I think absolutely.
Okay. What if you're a reviewer on a different continent and the slur is about someone's religious faith? How do you know if that person that's using the slur is a member of that group?
Yeah, no, you wouldn't. I guess you'd have to, yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know.
And I mean, like, what if they may not know someone's faith or orientation? It's a lot harder than people think it is actually to draw some of these policy lines and then be able to enforce them consistently at scale.
Hello, Insiders. I'm Rene Ritchie, your Creator Liaison, and I am sitting here today with Matt Halprin, Global Head of Trust and Safety at YouTube. How are you, Matt?
I'm good. Nice to be with you, Rene.
So you did a blog post recently where you went into how policies are made and enforced on YouTube. One of the first questions we get, I think is really foundational, is why does YouTube have to have policies at all? Why can't it just be if the content is illegal, we take it down and that's basically it?
Yeah, we do get that question a lot. Since the earliest days of YouTube, we have had community guidelines. And we want to balance who YouTube is, which is really to be an open and a place for freedom of expression, but balance that against harm to users and to the ecosystem of creators and just being responsible in general. And maybe one example of that is adult content. If we had no policy against adult content, it would probably overtake the site. And that's not what everybody wants YouTube to be, and so we have a policy against certain kinds of adult content. And then you start extending that to other places, like, well, what about child safety? Should it be okay to do something that actually harms children? We don't want that. And then what about things like hate or harassment? Creators actually don't want to be harassed, it turns out, or do other people want to be harassed? And so while we have a pretty high bar for what meets our bar for removal for harassment or for hate or something, we do think it's important to have policies that cover these areas to get that balance between freedom of expression and user safety right.
One of the things that we hear quite often is that the policies are sometimes really hard to understand.
So I don't actually think each individual policy is necessarily that hard to understand, but like all of them together, that's a lot. I mean, it is. It's a lot for everybody. We have tried to work on improving our help centers for that, although generally people read the help center only when they violated their policy. And that's normal, I think. We listen very carefully to this feedback, and we have been doing some work in the background with our product team, considering are there some adjustments we should be making in how our strike system works, for example. And no promises on exactly how or when or what or whatever like that. But that's because we're listening to this feedback on things that we might be able to do that could help people understand and make it. The purpose of the strike system is to be more about education. And so, are there any things we can do to improve the policy experience and help people be able to understand our policies before it impacts their account?
I think sometimes also for creators there is, for example, trust and safety, like community guidelines, but there's also ad-friendly guidelines. And then there are some things like age gating, which can be applied across several different things.
So, look, our platform is designed for, age 13 and up. We talk to child safety experts who point out that the 13-year-old mind is different than an 18-year-old mind, is different than a 50-year-old mind, and different kids are different. We have done a number of things, but one of which is we do have age gating, where we say, it's okay for this content to be on the platform, but it may not be appropriate for somebody under 18 to see. That's not really any different than what happens in the TV, movies, video games, things like that. I mean, that's we're just kind of lining up with them there. Of course, the issue is when something gets age gated, it also gets demonetized. When a video gets age gated, it gets demonetized, and we understand that can have a significant impact on a creator. We appreciate that that's frustrating, and we would like, if someone wants to avoid that, then they need to kind of keep their content a little bit different so it doesn't get age gated. But we think it's important to be a responsible platform to make sure that we're not showing something to a 13-year-old that maybe they wouldn't see at a movie or on TV or in a video game.
Then how do you balance creators who might want as few restrictions as possible with other groups who might want more restrictions, or with different countries that have either tighter or looser cultural norms?
Boy, that second part is really tricky. Cultural norms around the world are not exactly the US's
Yeah.
norms, which lean very strongly towards freedom of expression. And so, when I travel to my teams in Asia or Europe, it's common to get questions about, don't you allow too much on the platform? Aren't you too permissive? But we do have a strong freedom of expression ethos, and that is something that we take around the world. We don't have different standards, which makes it hard. It makes it hard for people in those markets, for creators. But that's, it's not really feasible to have a different set of policies for, every single country. With respect to, creators, some creators wanting more or less, truthfully, if half the people think we're too restrictive and half the people think we're too permissive, we might have that policy in about the right place.
Something else creators worry about a lot, especially creators from historically marginalized communities, is that flagging by itself, especially mass flagging, could take down their video, their channel. How does that work?
It doesn't matter whether there's one flag, 1,000 flags, 10,000 flags. It literally makes no difference into how the evaluation works or whether content should stay up or stay down. The first thing to say is people can look at our community guidelines enforcement report and they'll see that over 90% of the videos we remove are actually caught by our machines first. And then they'll be sent to a human to take a look at and validate it or not. So that much more and more technology is the one that's catching these more than user flags. And again, there's nothing relevant about whether it's one flag or 10,000 flags.
That raises an actually really interesting question there, because I think sometimes creators worry about bias or subjectivity or just personal opinion rather than an official policy when they're being reviewed.
The process is basically a content moderator gets served up a video and they're evaluating it against a policy and the enforcement guidelines behind that policy. And they're just comparing one against the other and saying, does this cross the line or not? And then we evaluate those raters frequently, really on a bi-weekly basis to see how their quality performance is, how their accuracy is. Are they implementing our enforcement guidelines accurately, our policies accurately? They compare the content they take down against those and see whether or not it has tripped the line or not. If they take something down they shouldn't, then that's a ding against their score, and the opposite too. If they leave something up that they should have removed, it's the same thing. And they're just getting measured against that. So that helps keep any potential bias out of the process.
Sometimes creators feel it's like a speeding ticket. They get pulled over while they watch a bunch of other cars just race by. So their video comes down, they see another video that they feel is very similar that's still up.
There's a few reasons why that may happen. One is simply just time. We have 500 hours a minute of video being uploaded. And so we may get to one video first and another one may show up the next day or something like that. And so there's a time period in between. Second is what seems like the same video or the same clip. The videos may actually get evaluated differently. So let's say that one creator makes a violative comment. And or there's a clip shown of somebody speaking and they just show it as a kind of a raw thing for people to look at. And it comes down because it's violative. The second video has the same clip, but in that video, the creator actually says, oh, and this isn't true, or, of course we don't believe in something like that. And that's what might qualify for an EDSA exception, an educational, documentary, scientific, or artistic exception, where because they have refuted the violative claim or condemned the violative claim, they're just kind of exposing it for that purpose. That video may stay up, even though the same violative clip gets in there. One exception is there, one's not. This happens oftentimes in news coverage where there'll be analysis about it and explaining why it needs to be refuted. The third is sometimes we just miss it. Sometimes we just miss something, and that we hope some people will flag it to us so that we can actually get more consistent and take the right action.
One thing we've seen regularly is policy updates. Why do we update policies?
The world happens on YouTube. And the world keeps changing, and norms keep changing. We see new types of content, and we take a fresh look at something, and we realize, when we wrote that policy 3 years ago, we didn't really contemplate this kind of new content that's coming up. And I think we need to make an update. Industry standards change, because norms change. And so what used to be, a teen is now a mature, or what used to be mature is now a teen. Same thing on, whether it's TV or video game. And so we try to align with industry standards often. And so we've made updates recently on both those areas, especially in the adult content area.
That does create a little bit of anxiety in the creator community, though, because we never know if old videos, we can't count on old videos still being viable in a new world. And sometimes it's hard to understand why new policy should apply to older videos.
This is a tough one, and I hear you for what you said and how frustrating that would be to have a video that you uploaded at one point and was compliant and all of a sudden is violative, and so it ends up getting taken down. Almost every time we change a content policy, if we end up having to take down old content, we don't give you any kind of account penalty. So we'll remove the content, but there'll be no strike issue to the account because we don't want to adversely impact a creator when we move the goalpost, as opposed to the creator didn't know our policy or didn't abide by the policy when they uploaded it. We often give a grace period, it might be 30 days or something like that, for people to adjust to the new policy before we'll start issuing strikes. We may again remove, but before we would issue any kind of account penalty. Why do we take it down? If norms have changed and we thought it was important enough to update a policy, then we actually think that content shouldn't be on YouTube, independent of the date that it was uploaded. We just try to mitigate it and how it impacts the creator's account.
Yeah, I guess because a new viewer will come on and still see that content as if it's fresh and new to them.
Exactly.
Sometimes there's also a feeling in the community that when policies change or when we decide to address something we've heard from creators, it takes a really long time for that to roll out. Can you give us an idea of why that is?
Once we do all the research and we go through our internal processes and we agree on a new policy line, it goes through a number of steps before we put it live. And that's because we want to be consistent when we get it out there. So the first thing we do is the people directly on my team, we'll give them 25 videos and say, you guys go apply the new policy to this. And maybe the first time they do that, they only match 70% of the time. And then you give them 25 other videos and eventually they get to like 95% or higher, or 100% match rate. That's great. Then we take that and we give it to a bunch of our content moderators, but not all of them, just like a small group. And we say, we give them the training materials and say, how do you do? And they may start out being 70% right. And eventually through multiple cycles of updating our training materials, maybe even modifying some of our enforcement guidelines that we thought were clear but aren't actually clear, then we eventually they get to like a 95% consistency rate. At that point, and only at that point, we will go out and train thousands and thousands of people because we want it to be consistent when it gets out live to everybody. And that process can take weeks and even months.
That brings us to timestamps, which is something that we hear a lot from creators, that it's really helpful when they can tell exactly what part of their video was being actioned by a policy. I know we're making more and more of those available to creators, but do you have any sense of where we are now with that?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is you're preaching to the choir, because part of my job is I'm just a content moderator. Like the high profile decisions we make often end up at my desk before we actually render a final verdict. And if someone on my team sends me a video without a timestamp, I'm not happy. And so I can totally get it. Creators should get timestamps too if we're going to take a video down. And so we have been working on that for a couple of years. We've rolled it out to a number of different policy verticals, and our goal is to get it to all policy verticals as soon as possible. It's a matter of time, but I would hope that by maybe the end of 23 or early in 24, we'll have most of those covered.
Matt, thank you so much for spending this time with us. I know policy, trust and safety, all of that is deeply concerning to creators, and we really appreciate the transparency.
Anytime. We appreciate everything creators do.
And thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, just please leave them below.